Just recently, the attention of the world was riveted on a deserted beach in northern Libya, where a group of 21 Coptic Christians were brutally beheaded by a gang of masked ISIS operatives. In the wake of the executions, the ISIS people sent a terrible video with the message, a message in blood to the nation of the cross. Now, what struck me was when they used that phrase, they probably just meant generically the Christian world. And the sad thing is, for a lot of Christians, that's all the cross means, kind of just a generic, anodyne, harmless symbol of Christianity. What struck me, though, was the juxtaposition of that terrible thing on the beach and the evocation of the cross, because it allows us to see in a new way the still startling power of the cross. Go back to Jesus' time now. The cross was not an anodyne symbol. The cross was a very brutal reality. It was, if you want, state-sponsored terrorism. The Roman authorities said, if you cross us, pun intended, we will do this to you. We will affix you to a brutal instrument of torture, and we will leave you writhing in literally excruciating pain, the word excruce from the cross. We'll leave you in excruciating pain until you die of your injuries, and then we'll leave your body on that cross to be devoured by scavenging animals. That's what the cross meant. It was meant to terrify people, and it did terrify people in the ancient world. One of the more eloquent witnesses to this is a passage in Cicero's writing. Cicero, the great Roman statesman and orator, one of the finest writers in Latin, can't bring himself to describe a crucifixion directly. He has to use a kind of elaborate circumlocution. It was just too terrible to contemplate. Think of the Spartacus rebellion. You know, when the Roman authorities put that down, they put Spartacus on a cross and hundreds of others lining the Appian Way into Rome. The idea was so to terrify people, they would never do something like that again. Pontius Pilate, the brutal Roman governor of Judea, also fixed Jewish rebels to the walls of the city of Jerusalem with the same idea in mind. And of course, it was that same Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, who crucified Jesus of Nazareth with the same purpose, to dissuade anyone who would, in his mind, stand athwart Roman power. Think of the reaction of the disciples, right? Everybody except for John fleeing from the cross. Of course they did. You know, they loved Jesus and they were his followers, but when it came to the cross, they fled. They locked themselves in the upper room because the last thing in the world they wanted was to end up on Calvary with him. Think of the disciples on the road to Emmaus. Where are they going? They're getting out of town as fast as they can because the last thing they wanted was to have the same fate as Jesus. The cross was a terrible, terrifying reality. That's why it is surpassing strange that a first century Pharisee, Saul of Tarsus, now called Paul the Apostle, can say blithely, I preach one thing, Christ and him crucified. See, we hear that language now. We say, well, yeah, of course, the crucified Jesus. That's Christianity. But put yourself in a first century setting, the year, let's say, 55, when Paul's writing that letter. Let me get this straight. You preach what? You preach one thing? Okay, what's your message? Someone crucified? Are you out of your mind? It's like the most disgusting, terrifying thing you could possibly proclaim. And that's your one message? How can Paul do that? Only because he also knew that the Jesus whom Rome crucified, God raised. Oh, the resurrection's a myth, it's a symbol and all that. I mean, give me a break. In a first century, that's 21st century faculty lounge language. First century Palestine or Greece, the resurrection's a myth or a symbol. That does me no good whatsoever. The cross, in its brutal reality, would defeat a symbol or a metaphor any day of the week. When Paul says, I preach one thing, Christ him crucified, it can only make sense if Paul knew that the one who'd been crucified had been raised by God from the dead. It was the surest sign of the fact of the resurrection, which is why when Paul and the others hold up the cross, they hold it up as a kind of taunt to Roman authority. I know this is what your power is based on, the terror of this thing. We're not afraid of it. In fact, we're going to hold it up as a taunt to you because we know that God's love is more powerful than anything you've got. Here's something else about the cross. In light of contemporary things, it's very interesting. The enormous concern within Islam for insulting cartoons and images of the Prophet Muhammad. Again, I'm not so much bad-mouthing their concern about that. I just want to observe something. See, Christianity regularly in its churches holds up an image of the mocked and humiliated Jesus. That we hold him up on the cross. We don't say, oh, don't you dare insult Jesus. We hold him up precisely as insulted. Why? Because we know that God's love is greater than anything that's in the world. And so the cross from ancient times to present day is a taunt to all the powers of the world who want to use violence to control people. Here's something I find very moving. In that awful video where we can see the Coptic Christians about to be executed, we can see a number of them mouthing the words, Jesus Christ and Jesus Lord, right? Jesus Christ, Jesus Christos in Greek, which translates Yeshua Mashiach, Jesus the Anointed One. If you say Mashiach, you meant the new David, the new Anointed One. The king, the victorious warrior king. How weird that the same Paul that says, I preach one thing, Christ and him crucified, also calls him Jesus Christos, Yeshua Mashiach. What could he possibly mean but that the victory has happened through the resurrection? More to it, Jesus is Lord, Jesus Kyrios in Paul's Greek. As I mentioned many times before, the watchword of the time was Kaiser Kyrios. Caesar is the Lord. He's the one who's got the power. He's the one to whom allegiance is due. When the early Christians said Jesus Kyrios, they were disempowering Caesar. They were saying he's not the one with the ultimate power. God is the one. God and his Christ have the ultimate power. That's why it's so moving to me to think of these poor men kneeling on the ground, about to be executed. But see, in mouthing the words, Jesus Christ and Jesus is Lord, they are confessing the faith. They are confessing the great kerygma, the proclamation of the Lordship of Jesus. The ISIS barbarians were actually quite right in entitling their message to the world, A Message in Blood. Tertullian said long ago that the blood of the martyrs is the seat of the church. And that's true. It was true in the ancient time. It's still true today. The blood of these martyrs is what will make the church grow. It's not a way of eliminating the church. It's a way of making the church grow. They should also know that as these men were announcing the kerygma, Jesus is Lord, Jesus Christ, they were holding up to them the taunt of the cross.